What is up, everybody? Happy Wednesday. Welcome to another episode of the College GameTime podcast. I'm your host, Trey Smith. And my, Ross Dellenger put a report out last night, or maybe it was yesterday afternoon, about a possible partnership between the Mountain West and the Pac-2 that would involve a relegation style system. We're going to dive into that today. I'm going to give you my thoughts on that. I think everything's on the table at this point. We've got relegation, rebuilds or mergers, or could the door for westward expansion open back up for the American? As an American Conference fan, do you want that door to open back up? Depending on how these dominoes fall. So I want to get into all of that today because I think there's some interesting discussion, and there's just some, when you really start to unpack it all, it kind of starts to make things a little more clear, I believe. So, well, as clear as mud, right? But before I get into it, you know what to do. If you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, comment at the end, share it with a friend. If you're listening on one of the streaming platforms, all I'm asking you to do is give it a 5-star rating. Please, that's all I'm asking. Give it a 5-star rating. And then if you feel, if you feel it in your heart to leave a positive review, I certainly would appreciate that as well. But without further ado, let's get into this. The first thing I want to go over is this Dellenger article. Sorry, I was pulling it up here on my computer. So we've got the Ross Dellenger article where he kind of brings up this idea of relegation being a thought, a point of consideration amongst this Mountain West Pac-2 conversation that's happening. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. I will put the link to this in the description, either on YouTube or whatever platform you're on if you want to go read it if you haven't yet. It's a good read. But it says, the Pac-2's answer, some believe, should be to create a 2-conference partnership with the Mountain West around a model similar to European soccer leagues, using a relegation and promotion system for football and potentially for other sports. It goes on to say the goal is to create high-stakes matchups. One Mountain West administrator said, "It's time we admit what college football is, an entertainment product." Officials who spoke to Yahoo Sports for this story did so under the agreement of being anonymous, sensitivity of the discussion. So the sources were anonymous. There was one other part. Yeah, it says the relegation promotion idea is only an idea for now. While the concept has been explored by many officials in both the Pac-2 and Mountain West, it is only one of a host of possible options in the early stages of examination. It's kind of brilliant. The reason it wouldn't happen is people wouldn't enter into something if they have the risk of losing something big. Yes. So basically, what it is that they don't actually merge, but the Mountain West and the Pac Conference enter into a partnership that is overseen by one commissioner, which likely would be the current Mountain West commissioner, and essentially you would have, I think what it laid out was like 8 teams on each conference. And then depending on which conference you're in, depends on what your payout is for that year. So it's very interesting. It's very fascinating. I do agree that it would make things more exciting from a competitive standpoint during the season because there's so much more to play for now than just a bowl game or a playoff bid, but you're playing to stay in that top tier conference. Where I'm not so sure this becomes sustainable is, and someone alluded to this in the article, but it's the budgeting aspect year to year. See, it works in the Premier Soccer League, I think is where they use this. In fact, I want to shout it out. There's so many videos and comments I'd have to go through to try and find it. But this was brought up this summer, or maybe it was earlier in August, by someone, one of you watching in the comments, a couple of you actually brought up this concept of, could we see this system of relegation instituted with the Pac in some sort of partnership. And, I had no idea, right? Like I don't follow Euro soccer. And so I'm not as familiar with, and that's kind of what I was saying. I'm not as familiar with that. Not sure what that would look like, but here's what I do know. It can work in a professional sports league when the teams are owned by billionaires. It will be very difficult to make a system like this work with, educational institutions who are relying on a certain amount of revenue year in and year out, because it'll be difficult to work because if you're a team that's on a, say, $20 million budget, and then you get relegated the next year that now kicks your budget down to a $6 million budget, you can't function that way as an academic institution. Like I've worked in school finance and funding, in a education department, and that's a huge thing, and that gets planned out, a year in advance. And so if you don't have the billionaire boosters and you don't have a billionaire owner, I don't really see this system working. Now, if you're looking at universities that have those billionaire boosters and have those massive NIL collectives who could help sustain if your team gets relegated down, and now they could come in and help absorb whatever amount of money you lose, okay, well, maybe you could see it working there. But like with these Mountain West teams, we're not talking, even the Pac teams, we're not talking about institutions that have these billionaire boosters behind them who, if they get relegated from one year to the next, are going to come in and absorb the decrease in financial funding for that academic school year or whatever. And so that's the biggest hiccup I see as far as this actually becoming a reality. I think another thing you have to take into consideration is in a relegated model, could this make teams more, what's the word I'm looking for? More prime for the poaching, so to speak. Like if you're one of those teams that you're bouncing back and forth year to year, but you're still a quality candidate for, say, a conference like the American, where you can maybe go get some more stable, consistent funding year to year, I think that's something you have to consider. But then on the flip side, if you're a team that's always being relegated, or you're a team that's never making it to that top conference, like, is that a team that another conference is going to want to poach anyways? So here's what I think this is really about personally. I think that the Pac-2 are trying to send a message to the Mountain West Conference teams that they want to rebuild with of pay your exit fee. In other words, I think this is being used as a motivational tactic. Not that I don't doubt that they're discussing it and they're kicking it around. And I'm sure the commissioner of the Mountain West would love for this to happen, because now she becomes kind of this commissioner over a super conference in a sense, one being a G5, one being Power 5 status, and then you kind of relegate it, you reset it year to year. But I also think this is kind of a Pac-2's play of saying, we don't want the bottom tier of this conference. They've made that very clear. They do not want the bottom tier. And that's why, as I said last week, I think a merger is completely off the table. But could those two teams be utilizing this concept as a way to try and motivate the Boise's, the San Diego States, the UNLVs, the Fresno States to strongly consider paying the exit fee that they'd have to pay, as big as it is, in order to get into a quote unquote Power 5 conference? I don't know. Because I was thinking about this, which is easier, a partnership that includes relegation, or just paying your exit fee and joining a rebuilt Pac? If I'm Fresno State, do I want to join? It'll be cheaper for me to be in this conference where there's relegation year to year, However, there's less stability. There's more risk. And so it's almost like it's maybe a chess move to try and motivate these institutions who maybe are a little bit hesitant to figure out how they can pay that exit fee in order to join the pack, to get them to say, okay, I mean, do you want to do this setup where there's relegation involved and there's no stability year to year and there's a lot of risk attached to it? Or do you just want to pay this exit fee and then come be a Power 5 institution, come be a part of a quote unquote Power 5 conference? Because technically, if they retain all those assets, which of course that is still contingent on this court case, which we discussed last week, which is likely going to go in the favor of the pack, they retain all those assets. They still retain Auto 5 status. They're still considered Power 5 for now. Pay your exit fee and come join. There's more stability that way. There's less risk that way. Yes, financially, it's going to cost you more, but in the end, it's going to be better for your institution. To me, that's what I think this whole relegation stuff is more about, is trying to motivate the top tier teams of the Mountain West to pay the exit fee to join the pack. You know, it's kind of planting that seed. Right? It's kind of saying, well, you know, because I'm thinking if I'm an administration of one of these Mountain West universities that is being desired by the pack, I'm hearing this news and I'm going, okay, what do we got to do to just pay this exit fee if it came up? Because the only reason why they would do it this way is if the pack felt like the teams they wanted wouldn't be willing to pay the exit fee to join. That's my opinion on it. And then, of course, they're not going to do a full merger. I mean, that seems to be evident at this point. If you're willing to consider a relegation model, like over just doing a merger, you definitely have decided that we want nothing to do with the bottom tier teams. So I got to thinking about this now and kind of tying this back to the American Athletic Conference. Based on what I just said, I think that the pack is setting the table to try and rebuild this conference through backfilling, right? And what would that look like, right? And then, of course, as I've been saying, could the American Conference be in danger of losing a couple of teams as well? Take Memphis and Tulane, for example, who I think both Memphis for sure, Tulane, I'm still not so sure as it pertains to their administration, but Memphis for sure, would they see an opportunity to join a rebuilt pack as their final shot, their final Hail Mary of actually being in what's considered a Power 5 conference? You know, kind of like SMU saw this opportunity with the ACC. They put all the money up as their final chance at being affiliated with a Power 5 conference. And so I was thinking, okay, if you're going to rebuild the pack through backfilling, what could that rebuilt conference look like? Well, I'm going to show you a picture here, and if you're listening, I'll call out. So as you see, a rebuilt pack, you've got Oregon State, Washington State, and then I just put 6 of the teams I think from the Mountain West they'd be looking to poach. You've got Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State, UNLV, San Jose State, and Wyoming. Now, I know some of you, if you're a Mountain West or you're a West Coast person watching this, you maybe put a question mark on San Jose State. My thought was, if you're going to rebuild the pack with your choice teams from the Mountain West, you would go ahead and snag the California teams, right? So now you have the Bay Area with San Jose State, and you have Southern California with San Diego State. Then I put Wyoming, UNLV. Look, I'm not saying these would be the 6, but based off what I've read, just throughout this whole process in general, looking at competitive success, I think this is is a fair choice of 6 teams that you would look to pick from the Mountain West if you're Oregon State, Washington State. And then, as you can see, I've got Memphis and Tulane on here because I do think those would be the 2 targets for a rebuilding pack. Now, geographically, it doesn't make sense. But the one thing that could fix that is money. Now, what type of media deal could this conference we're looking at on the screen demand? I don't know. But hypothetically, right? If this were to be a rebuilt Pac-10, Pac-12 conference, I'm going to pull this down now. If that were to be it, which, as I said, it was Oregon State, Washington State, Boise State, Fresno, San Diego State, San Jose State, UNLV, Wyoming, Memphis, and Tulane, let's just say hypothetically that becomes the Pac-12. Well, one of the discussions that came up last week on this channel when I was talking about, I think it was when I was talking about my top 5 expansion targets for the American, there were several people who started talking about, well, let's see what happens with this Mountain West Pac situation because it could reopen the door for westward expansion, which I totally agree. But as I started looking into this, I started thinking, okay, if you're the American, this would certainly open up the door for you to go get the remnants of the Mountain West Conference. In other words, the teams that got left behind. But as I'm looking at it, are we so sure that's a better option than the potential targets you could have on the East? Now, one argument is, for the yes to that question, is because they would likely be available and possibly not have to pay an exit fee depending on how this thing shook out. On the other hand, though, I'm looking at New Mexico, Nevada, Utah State, Hawaii. Would I rather have those teams over Georgia State and who were some of the other ones I said last week? JMU, James Madison. And so all that to say this. If that rebuilt pack I just discussed were to become a thing, I started going, okay, what would be the best course of action for the American to take if they lose those 2 teams, which are, premier teams in the conference? Let me make sure I make this clear. I'm not saying I actually think that's going to happen, but it's on the table. Because I honestly think this whole relegation model is more of a motivating tactic to try and get these Mountain West teams to pay their exit fee so they can just join and it be more seamless. And that way the Pac can get the teams they want without having to deal with the lower tier teams. So anyways, I got to thinking, all right, let's just say hypothetically that happened. You lose Memphis and Tulane, but you have some Mountain West leftovers that are primed for the poaching. And I kind of put together this conference right here that I'm going to put up on the screen. And again, if you're just listening, I will call it out to you. So as you can see, in AAC expansion, what if you went and got Air Force and Colorado State? Because quite frankly, for me, those would be the only 2 I think I would really give a hard look. And maybe I'm not being fair to some of those other schools. And if you have some insight I'm not considering, feel free. I know there's people who feel like New Mexico would be a good addition. And I think I could understand that argument. I think with basketball and just some other things and maybe with the additional resources, things of that nature. But let's just humor this for a second. Okay. You got a West Coast sort of pod or region, whatever you want to call it, with Air Force, Colorado State, the Texas schools, so UNT, Rice, and UTSA, and Tulsa. Then you have your Southeast with Charlotte, ECU, FAU, Georgia State, UAB, and USF. Now, I had a beat writer, I think, with 24/7 Sports for Georgia State's 24/7 Sports. We were going back and forth on Twitter. He had written an article a couple years ago talking about why Georgia State would never leave the Sun Belt. But then I gave my response to him because in that article, his 5 reasons I don't know are strong enough to hold up in the current landscape. So I'm not willing to just throw in the towel on them. And then you have your Northeast with Army Buffalo, who has strongly grown on me even since my video last week. A lot of people started mentioning them, and as I continue to see the different arguments and feedback in regards to Buffalo, it really grew on me. Then you had JMU, Liberty. I leaped Liberty up my list simply because it fills out that Northeast region, Navy and Temple. So if you're not seeing what I'm looking at right now, basically it was Army, Buffalo, JMU, Liberty, Navy, Temple in the Northeast, Charlotte, ECU, FAU, Georgia State, UAB, and USF in the Southeast, and then Air Force, Colorado State, North Texas, Rice, Tulsa, and UTSA in the West. I'm going to pull that graphic back down now if you're watching. So, I don't know. That was what I was, again, as we're trying to go down this realignment rabbit trail and as we're having this discussion, because obviously it's not going away. I'm trying to keep it maybe to 1 day a week where I really talk about this, maybe 2, depending on what's going on. But I don't know. I don't think this relegation thing's going to happen. I think there's too many deal breaker issues that will come up that will keep it, that will prevent it from happening. And it mainly being the year-to-year budget. And amongst some other things. And obviously you can read that article and see the full layout of what Ross Dellenger wrote in there. But, it makes me think, okay, boy, Oregon State and Washington State sure are seems to be committed to rebuilding their conference, and they're not going to merge. If they're going to rebuild their conference, they're certainly going to take the top of the Mountain West first, and then I think they do look to the American. Now, again, I'm not trying to sound biased, but, Memphis and Tulane leaving for that, I would need to see what they were leaving for, because they're literally on their own islands compared to the rest of the conference. There's nowhere to there's no teams you could really pod them with. And so I would have to see what the finances looked like for that to make that make sense to me. But like Memphis right now, I mean, like the fan base is fed up. Administrations they're putting the stuff out in regards to, there was a conversation with Brett Yormark or something was reported. I didn't really dive into it in regards to Memphis and Houston basketball. Anyways, there's just a lot of I think, pressure on the Memphis administration right now from the fan base and from, the people surrounding that program to get into a Power 5. And if the opportunity to join a Pac-2 on a backfill type deal, I think they would probably have to do it. But again, the numbers have to make sense. And so if that were to happen, then I started thinking, okay, what doors does this open for American Conference expansion? Do you go all in on the West and try to go absorb the remnants of the Mountain West? Or do you pick and choose, take Air Force and Colorado State? I feel pretty confident Army's on the way. So you have Air Force, Army, and Navy in the same conference. You get Colorado State. I think that would be a very strong addition. And then maybe it allows you to go grab a Georgia State and a Buffalo or a Liberty or whoever, an App State. I'm not just trying to limit it to those, but I was trying to think, regionally, what would make sense for travel. Also the competitive success, also the TV markets, all that stuff I talked about last week. And that's basically what I came to. So before I get off here, before I sign off here, the one thing that would completely make all of this obsolete is exactly what I said last week, which is if a Power 5 conference comes back into the picture, whether that be the Big 12 or another one. Sounds like the Big 12 door may not be totally shut, especially with this court case trending towards going in the Pac-2's favor. So I still think that's probably option number 1. And then I think option number 2 is a Pac-2 rebuild through backfill. but I think they understand how difficult that's going to be. So they're sort of using this relegation conversation as a way to maybe motivate those teams to strongly consider just paying the exit fee and joining instead of having to deal with this model of relegation. But I don't know. I could be wrong on all that. So you guys let me know your thoughts. That's our Realignment Wednesday discussion. Tomorrow we'll be back, unless some other news comes out. Tomorrow we'll be back to talking football, talking trending topics, getting ready for the weekend. We're almost there. But that's it for me today. Trey Smith, College Game Time.